The harvest bell rang through our desert town. My father spoke of legacy, bloodlines. Who would carry the name forward? Applause followed. Tears too. But I stood there, my son in my arms, and his name was never spoken. A child alive, yet unseen. In that moment, I learned the truth. Silence doesn't erase reality. It only postpones the reckoning. I was always described as the independent one, the daughter who didn't need much, the one who figured things out on her own and didn't make a fuss. Growing up, that sounded like a compliment. Adults said it with pride, like I'd earned something early. What I didn't realize then was how easily that label could become permission to step away. I learned to solve problems quietly. If something broke, I fixed it. If I was overwhelmed, I stayed up later. If I needed help, I talked myself out of asking. By the time I was an adult, everyone assumed I was fine, not happy, not thriving, just fine enough to be ignored. People ask me now why I didn't just call my father, why I didn't drive out to his place, why I didn't show up unannounced, baby in my arms, and force the truth into the open. From the outside, it probably looks simple. There was a phone, there was a road, there was nothing physically stopping me. But that's not how distance works in families like mine. No one ever told me I couldn't call. I just stopped feeling like I was welcome when I did. Every attempt came with hesitation. Was I interrupting? Was he busy? Would I sound dramatic? Would this turn into another awkward conversation that ended with, "We'll talk soon," and nothing changing? After enough of those, you start editing yourself. You keep messages shorter. You wait for better timing. You tell yourself it's not urgent. And then you wait too long. When there's someone else controlling the flow of information, silence isn't chosen. It's learned. It's a survival skill. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't holding back out of pride. I was avoiding the feeling of being dismissed one more time, because rejection doesn't always come as a slammed door. Sometimes it's just the door never opening. Being independent meant I didn't get follow-up questions. No one checked in twice. No one asked what I needed. They saw me managing and assumed I didn't require care. What people don't understand is that independence is often built out of necessity. You learn to carry things alone because no one shows up when you put them down. And over time, that becomes your role. In my family, roles mattered more than reality. Someone was the caretaker. Someone was the center. Someone was the problem. And someone was the one who could handle it. I was the last one. So when months passed, it didn't feel like I was being excluded. It felt like I was fading, not erased, just no longer considered. The truth is, I wasn't unloved. I was deprioritized. There's a difference, and it's harder to confront. People don't feel guilty ignoring someone who seems strong. They tell themselves that person doesn't need anything, that they'll speak up if it matters. What they don't see is how many times that person already tried. By the time I stopped reaching out, it wasn't anger driving me. It was exhaustion. Each unanswered call trained me to ask less. Each rescheduled visit taught me to expect less. Eventually, I learned how to disappear politely. And the thing about disappearing politely is that no one notices until something forces them to look. Being called independent let everyone off the hook. It allowed them to believe they were good parents, good relatives, good people. Because how could they be failing someone who didn't seem to need them? I wasn't ignored because I was difficult. I wasn't ignored because I caused conflict. I was ignored because I made it easy. That realization didn't come with relief. It came with a quiet kind of grief. The grief of understanding that nothing was wrong with me. I just wasn't loud enough to compete with someone else's version of events. I stood there holding my son, and it finally made sense. Not why I hadn't called, but why calling had stopped mattering. I hadn't lost my place because I left. I lost it because someone else filled the space while I stayed silent. And silence, once it settles in, can rewrite an entire story without ever raising its voice. I wasn't hated. I wasn't rejected outright. I was simply no longer necessary to the narrative, and that realization stayed with me, heavy and unresolved, long before anyone else realized what had been missing. Claire Reed was never the loudest person in the room. She didn't need to be. She knew exactly where to stand. Growing up, she learned early that attention wasn't something you demanded. It was something you positioned yourself for. She smiled at the right moments. She cried when people were watching. If there was a story to tell, Claire told it first. And if there wasn't, she found a way to frame one. I used to think that meant she was more confident, more open, more emotionally honest. It took me a long time to realize it was something else entirely. Claire understood something I didn't. People don't believe what's true. They believe what feels familiar and easy to accept. When she spoke, she never sounded angry. She sounded concerned. She used words like worried and trying to help. And people listened. If she said I was overwhelmed, they nodded. If she said I needed space, they respected it. If she said I'd be fine, they felt relieved. Because her version of events required nothing from them. I was the one who always said I was okay. She was the one who said she was concerned about me. Between the two of us, her story felt more responsible, more caring, more believable. Families don't side with villains. They side with the version of reality that lets them stay comfortable. Claire never accused me outright. She didn't have to. She let implication do the work. She didn't answer. She's been busy. She didn't seem ready. Each sentence sounded harmless on its own. Together, they painted a picture I didn't recognize, but everyone else accepted. The more I stayed quiet, the easier her story became to tell. I wasn't there to interrupt it. I wasn't there to correct details. I wasn't there to complicate things. And complicated stories make people uncomfortable. Claire gave them something simpler. She showed up early. She stayed late. She asked questions in front of others so they could see her trying. She made herself visible in ways I never thought to. I kept assuming the truth would speak for itself. She understood that truth needs a microphone. There's a strange comfort in believing the person who looks like they need you. It makes you feel useful. It makes you feel important. Claire needed them, at least. She looked like she did. I didn't. I had already proven I could handle things alone, so they let me. That's how trust quietly shifts. Not because someone lies loudly, but because someone else stops insisting on being seen. If you were watching from the outside, you would have thought Claire was protecting me, that she was stepping in because I couldn't. No one stopped to ask whether I'd been pushed out of the conversation entirely. They trusted the person who made them feel involved. They ignored the one who made it easy to step back. When people say, "I don't understand how everyone believed her," they miss the point. Belief wasn't earned through facts. It was earned through emotional convenience. Claire never raised her voice. She never demanded loyalty. She just filled the silence I left behind. And silence is dangerous in shared spaces. It invites interpretation. It invites replacement. The more she spoke for me, the less anyone expected to hear from me directly. Eventually, I wasn't just absent from conversations. I was absent from decisions. Plans were made without checking in. Assumptions were formed without confirmation. My name stopped coming up unless it was followed by concern. I watched it happen slowly, like furniture being moved out of a room you don't use anymore. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looked like betrayal. just a steady shift of focus. People didn't ask why I wasn't around. They assumed Claire knew, and she always had an answer ready. What hurt the most wasn't that they believed her. It was that no one thought to ask me. I wasn't excluded with hostility. I was replaced with efficiency. Claire's story didn't attack me. It erased me. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to step back in. Correcting the record would have required effort, and effort makes people defensive, so they stayed with the version they already understood. I began to see the pattern clearly. The person who narrates becomes the authority. The person who adapts becomes invisible. Being low maintenance made me easy to overlook. Being emotionally expressive made her easy to trust. And trust, once established, doesn't like to be questioned. I didn't lose my place because I did something wrong. I lost it because I stopped competing for attention. I thought I shouldn't have to earn. Claire didn't win because she was better. She won because she showed up where stories were being told. I was busy living quietly, assuming reality would protect me. It didn't. In families like mine, the best storyteller doesn't just shape perception, they shape consequences. And by the time I understood that, the story had already moved on without me. The applause around us kept rolling like it belonged to someone else. I shifted Milo higher on my hip, the way you do when your arm starts to go numb but you don't want anyone to notice. He smelled like sunscreen and warm milk. Ethan stood close enough that our shoulders touched. His hand hovered near my back, not quite holding me, like he was waiting to see what I wanted. I didn't look at him. If I did, I knew my face would change. My father kept talking. Legacy, hard work, family name. Claire stood near the small stage, one hand on her stomach, the other wiping at a tear that looked perfectly timed. People kept coming up to her in a steady line. Hugs, photos, soft voices, the kind of attention that made it feel like the whole day was built around her. And I stayed where I was, at the edge of the crowd, holding a child no one introduced. At first, I told myself it didn't matter, that we didn't need applause, that we didn't need recognition from a microphone. But then my father turned slightly, scanning faces, and his eyes went right past Milo, not over him, past him. That was when something inside me stopped hoping. We left early, not because we were angry, because Milo was getting fussy, and I was getting tired, and I didn't trust what would come out of my mouth if I stayed one more minute. That night, after I put Milo down, I stood in the kitchen with the fridge door open, not because I was hungry, because cold air felt better than whatever was happening in my chest. Ethan came in behind me and didn't ask questions right away. He just said, "Do you want me to make tea?" I nodded. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop. It wasn't dramatic. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was just done floating. If I'd learned anything from being the independent one, it was this: people forget what isn't written down. So I started with the smallest thing, the VIP wristbands. Claire had told the festival committee she needed a set for immediate family only. That's what the email said, immediate family. And yet, mine never arrived. I searched my inbox first. Nothing. Then I searched Ethan's. Nothing. Then, on instinct, I checked my spam folder. Still nothing. It wasn't proof by itself, but it was a pattern I recognized. I went to the festival website and pulled up the volunteer portal Ethan had used last year. Same login, same dashboard. There was a schedule posted for the weekend, a neat grid of names and shifts, setup, check-in, stage coordination, vendor support. Every key position had one name repeated: Claire, Claire for vendor check-in, Claire for stage support, Claire for guest coordination. Claire for family liaison. Family liaison. I stared at that phrase longer than I should have. It wasn't a title you got by accident. It was a title someone gave you when they trusted you to speak for everyone else. I scrolled down and found the note section. Any family-related questions should be directed to Claire Reed. I felt my throat tighten. Directed. Like I was a problem to be managed. The next morning, while Milo napped, I drove into town under the excuse of buying diapers. I parked outside the community center where festival staff were running last-minute errands. Inside, the air smelled like printer ink and coffee. People moved fast with clipboards and lanyards. No one looked up when I walked in. I asked for the volunteer coordinator, and a woman in a sun-faded baseball cap waved me toward a small desk. She smiled like she knew me. "Are you here for Claire?" That one sentence landed harder than it should have. I kept my voice steady. "I'm Hannah, Robert Reed's daughter." Her smile flickered, just a little, like her brain was searching for a file. "Oh, right. Hi." It wasn't rude. It was worse. It was unfamiliar. I asked about the VIP access. I asked casually, like it wasn't a big deal. She pulled up the list on her computer, clicked, scrolled, and then she said, "Huh." Just one word. I watched her eyes move back and forth across the screen. "Looks like Claire submitted the final list yesterday. It was updated. That was how she said it. Like it was normal. Like names came and went like weather. I asked, "Was my name ever on it?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I can't see previous versions, just the current one." I nodded like I understood, but on the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the word updated. Because updates leave traces, even when people don't mean them to. That afternoon, I sat on the living room floor with Milo beside me, chewing on a soft fabric book. I opened a notebook, an actual paper notebook, the kind I used for grocery lists and pediatrician notes, and I started writing down dates. Not feelings, dates. When the first festival planning email went out, when Claire offered to handle family logistics, when Dad stopped answering my texts with full sentences and started replying with thumbs-up emojis, I wrote down the small things that didn't look like crimes. Because in families, the damage rarely looks like one big act. It looks like a series of tiny disappearances. A seat that isn't saved. A photo you're not tagged in. A group text you're not on. A list you're not included in. Each one is easy to dismiss. Together, they become evidence. Ethan watched me from the couch, the way you watch someone build something you didn't know they needed. He finally asked, "What are you doing?" I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was hard to admit. I was preparing, not to attack, to exist, to prove that Milo wasn't a misunderstanding, that I wasn't a footnote, that what was happening had a shape, a timeline, a source. I saved screenshots. I forwarded emails to myself. I took photos of posted schedules when I saw them. I didn't feel powerful doing it. I felt sick. But I also felt something new. Clarity. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't begging to be seen. I was collecting the proof that I hadn't imagined being invisible, and once you start seeing the pattern clearly, you can't unsee it. So I kept going, quietly, consistently, because I knew what came next. If you were me, would you stay silent and hope someone finally noticed? Or would you make sure the truth had somewhere to live when the story tried to erase it again? The second bell rang, signaling the start of the main ceremony. People moved closer to the stage, drinks in hand, phones already raised. I adjusted Milo against my chest, feeling his weight settle in, familiar and grounding. He had been quiet most of the afternoon. Too much sun, too many sounds. His fingers curled into the fabric of my shirt, like he was anchoring himself. My father stepped down from the platform and began greeting people one by one. Firm handshakes, claps on the back, the kind of smile he reserved for public moments. I watched him work the crowd the way he always had, confident. Comfortable, certain of his place, Claire stayed close, just behind his shoulder, not leading, not following, exactly where she needed to be. I didn't plan to move. I wasn't trying to be seen. I was just standing there, waiting for Milo to calm down. Then my father turned. At first, his eyes didn't land on me. They passed over my shoulder, scanning faces he recognized. Neighbors, friends, people who belonged. Milo shifted in my arms and let out a soft sound, somewhere between a sigh and a whine, not loud enough to draw attention, just enough to remind me he was there. And then he saw him. I felt it before I understood it. The slight pause in my father's steps, the fraction of a second where his expression didn't know what to do next. Milo looked straight at him, not curious, not confused, certain. His eyes locked in, the way babies do when something feels familiar before they have words for it. His hand lifted, fingers opening and closing, reaching without thinking. He smiled, not a polite smile, not the kind you practice, the kind that takes over your whole face without asking permission. The noise around us faded, or maybe I just stopped hearing it. I don't know. What I do know is that Milo leaned forward, his body responding before my mind caught up. He made a small sound, one he usually reserved for Ethan after a long day. My father froze. People noticed then. Not because anyone pointed, because stillness draws attention in a moving crowd. He took one step closer, then another. His eyes didn't leave Milo's face. I didn't say anything. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain. I just stood there. Milo reached out again, more insistent this time. His fingers brushed the air between them, like he expected something to meet him halfway. My father's hand lifted slowly, unsure, hovering. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing me for the first time that day. What he started, then stopped. The word didn't come. Claire shifted beside him. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. The way her posture stiffened, the way her smile hesitated. But Milo didn't look at her. He only had eyes for the man standing in front of him. The crowd had gone quiet. Not silent, just attentive. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered something I couldn't make out. My father swallowed. He lowered his hand, then raised it again, slower this time, until Milo's fingers wrapped around one of his own. It was a simple thing, a reflex, but it landed heavier than any accusation ever could. Milo squeezed, testing the grip, then smiled wider, like he'd found what he was looking for. My father's breath hitched, just once. He didn't ask whose child this was. He didn't look around for confirmation. He knew. I saw it in the way his shoulders dropped, in the way his face softened into something unguarded. The man who had spoken so confidently minutes earlier couldn't find his voice now. No one said a word, because there was nothing to say. You can argue with explanations. You can dismiss stories. You can twist intentions. But you can't negotiate with instinct. Milo leaned his head against my chest again, satisfied, like his job was done, like he'd made his point without knowing there was one to make. My father looked between us, confusion and recognition colliding in real time. "How old is he?" he finally asked. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't steady either. I answered simply, 7 months. That was it. No speech, no confrontation, No carefully prepared line, just a fact. Placed gently where it couldn't be ignored. Around us, people started to piece things together, not because anyone explained, because they could see it, the resemblance, the timing, the way my father hadn't let go yet. Claire stepped forward, her hand reaching for his arm. He didn't notice, or maybe he did, and chose not to respond. For the first time that day, the story didn't belong to the person who told it best. It belonged to the moment that couldn't be rehearsed. I felt strangely calm, not relieved, not vindicated, just still. I didn't feel alone anymore. And as my father stood there, holding the hand of a child he couldn't deny, I realized something important. The truth hadn't needed my voice. It had found its own. And once it did, there was no taking it back. After that moment, everything slowed down. Not because anyone stopped talking, but because no one knew what to say next. People drifted back to their seats. The band started tuning again. The festival tried to move on, but something had shifted. I felt it in the way people looked at me now. Not curious, not suspicious, just recalibrating. I didn't speak right away. I didn't need to. I had learned something a long time ago. When emotions run high, people choose sides. When evidence shows up, sides disappear. I waited until later that evening. Milo had fallen asleep in the stroller. The lights were softer, the crowd thinner. That's when I opened my bag. Inside was a thin folder, nothing dramatic, no speeches attached, just paper. I started with the land documents, old ones, yellowed at the edges, signed years before anyone started telling a different version of the story. The farm wasn't family property in the way people assumed. It never had been. It was split, allocated, defined. My name was there. So was Claire's. But the permissions were different. I laid the pages out on the folding table near the stage. Flat, visible, no commentary. Then came the festival logs. Email chains printed in plain black ink. Scheduling notes. Vendor approvals. Every decision had a timestamp. Every change had a sender. Claire's name appeared again and again. Mine didn't. Not once. People leaned in. Not because I asked them to, because documents invite scrutiny. Someone asked a question. I pointed to a date. Someone else interrupted. I pointed to a signature. No raised voice. No anger, just facts, sitting there, doing their work. I noticed something then. No one was asking how I felt anymore. They weren't asking if I was hurt, or lonely, or misunderstood. They were asking what happened. That's the difference. Feelings ask for permission, evidence demands consequences. My father stood a few steps back, watching. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend anyone. He just looked tired. Tired in a way that comes when you realize avoiding the truth took more effort than facing it ever would have. Someone mentioned the VIP passes. I reached into my pocket and pulled one out, torn clean, down the middle. I placed it next to the emails, next to the schedules. A small thing, but small things add up. No one laughed. No one dismissed it, because patterns are hard to ignore once you see them. Claire tried to speak then. Just a few words, carefully chosen. She said it was a misunderstanding, that things had gotten complicated. No one argued. They just waited for something solid. She didn't have it. That's when I understood why I had been doubted for so long. It wasn't because my story was wrong. It was because stories compete. Evidence doesn't. You don't need to like someone to accept a document. You don't need to feel empathy to read a timestamp. Truth, When it's recorded, stops being personal, it becomes structural. I watched people mentally rearrange what they thought they knew, not dramatically, quietly. Beliefs adjusted, assumptions collapsed. No one apologized yet. That would come later, or not at all. But something more important happened first. Responsibility landed. My father finally stepped forward. He picked up one of the papers and read it slowly, then another. He didn't look at me when he spoke. I should have known. He said, not loud, not for effect, just honest. That sentence didn't fix anything, but it mattered. Because it wasn't emotional, it was accountable. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. For the first time, I wasn't asking anyone to believe me. I had removed belief from the equation entirely, and that changed everything. People started asking different questions now, about access, about authority, about decisions that had been made quietly. Consequences don't announce themselves. They begin with paperwork. As the night went on, the folder stayed on the table, open. No one put it away. It didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the truth. I stood there, watching Milo sleep, feeling something unfamiliar settle in. Relief, maybe, but not the kind that celebrates, the kind that exhales. I wasn't alone anymore. Not because people suddenly understood my pain, but because they could no longer deny my reality. And that's when I realized something I wish I'd learned sooner. Emotions can move people, but only evidence moves systems. Feelings ask to be heard. Proof forces change. That night, I didn't win anything. I simply stopped losing ground. And once that happens, there's no going back. Claire didn't explode. That's what people expect when someone gets caught. A scene, a breakdown, a dramatic confession. But Claire was too practiced for that. She stayed calm in the way someone stays calm when they still believe they can steer the room. She leaned in toward my father, her voice low, like this was a private misunderstanding, like the papers on the table were inconvenient, not damning. I watched her do what she always did. She tried to shrink the moment. She told people the documents were out of context. She said there had been so many moving pieces. She said she'd been doing her best, and for a second, it almost worked, because people want a way out. They want a version of events that doesn't require them to admit they were wrong, but evidence doesn't give people an exit with dignity. It just sits there. So the room stayed quiet. No one argued with Claire. They just kept looking down at the pages. Someone pointed at an email header. Someone else asked who had submitted the final access list. Someone read the timestamps out loud. Each question stripped another layer off her story. Claire's smile tightened. My father didn't move. He stood there like a man who'd been holding his breath for years and finally realized he was the one doing it. He looked older under the festival lights, not frail, just exposed. Ethan shifted beside me, and Milo stirred in the stroller, making a soft sound. I gently rested my hand on the handle, rocking it once. I didn't say anything. I had already said what mattered by placing the truth where everyone could see it. My father finally spoke again. Claire, he said, just her name. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even loud, but it stopped her. She turned toward him quickly, like she'd been waiting for him to rescue her, like she expected him to redirect the conversation back to something comfortable. He didn't. He asked one question. When did you know? Claire blinked. She tried to answer with a story. She started talking about timing and stress and not wanting to worry anyone. He didn't follow her there. He looked at the paper again, then at Milo, then back at her. When did you know? He repeated. The second time. There was no room to decorate it. Claire's breath caught, just slightly. She glanced around, searching for someone to lean on. No one stepped forward. That was the first real crack. Not the documents, not the timeline, the silence. The room wasn't siding with her anymore. Claire tried a different angle. She turned to me, her voice softening into something almost sisterly. Hannah, you didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to do? It was clever. It placed responsibility on me without accusing me outright. I stared at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to explain myself, because explaining is how you keep the peace, and keeping the peace was how this happened. My father looked at me then, not with accusation, with confusion. The kind of confusion that means, I should have asked earlier. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, an apology. Maybe. Then he closed it. He didn't deserve the comfort of skipping to the emotional part. Yet, that night wasn't about feelings. It was about consequences. Someone from the festival committee approached the table, a man I recognized from town meetings, the kind of person who liked rules because rules meant order. He pointed at the family liaison assignment. He pointed at the access list. This needs to be reported. He said, matter-of-factly, report. That word landed in the air and didn't soften. Claire's eyes widened. For the first time, she wasn't controlling the story anymore. She tried to laugh it off, to make it sound like small-town politics, like paperwork didn't matter. But that's the thing. Paperwork always matters when it's tied to land. My father's jaw tightened. He turned away from the crowd and walked a few steps toward the farm office, the small building behind the main stage. He didn't tell anyone to follow. He didn't ask for space. He just moved like someone finally choosing reality over image. If you've ever watched someone reach the end of denial, you know the look. It isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's heavy. It's final. I followed him, not quickly, not defiantly, just enough to show I wasn't disappearing again. Inside, the office smelled like dust and old wood. There was a desk, a file cabinet, and a framed photo from years ago. My father, Claire, and me, standing in front of the vineyard. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until I heard him exhale. He sat down, rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand, and stared at the folder in front of him. I thought you were fine, he said. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. The saddest part was how ordinary it sounded. I didn't answer right away. I looked at his hands instead. The same hands that had tightened bolts on my first bike. The same hands that now couldn't seem to hold onto the truth without trembling. He swallowed. I let her speak for all of us, he said, quieter. He didn't say Claire's name that time. He didn't need to. We both knew who her was. Outside, the festival noise drifted in through the thin walls. Laughter, music, life moving on. Inside, everything felt still. My father finally looked up at me. I failed you, he said, not as a dramatic line, as a fact he could no longer avoid. That should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like standing in a room you've wanted to enter your whole life, only to realize it was never supposed to be locked. Claire appeared in the doorway then. She didn't barge in. She didn't cry. She stood there like someone waiting to see if she still had a role. My father didn't turn to comfort her. He didn't soften his face. He simply said, "This stops tonight." Short sentence. No room for negotiation. Claire's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had nothing useful to say. The collapse didn't come from me humiliating her. It came from her losing access to the only thing that kept her powerful, the ability to narrate. My father stood up. He picked up the folder, held it like it weighed more than paper, and walked past Claire without touching her shoulder. I watched her eyes follow him, blinking fast, trying to understand what had changed. The answer was simple. He finally chose to look at what was real, and when the person in power stops avoiding the truth, the whole structure shifts, not with revenge, with responsibility. That night, no one cheered, no one clapped, but the story stopped being hers. And once that happens, the rest is just consequences catching up. The next morning, the festival was gone like it had never happened. The banners were taken down. The parking lot was empty. The dust had already started to settle back into its usual place. Ethan made coffee, and Milo babbled in his high chair like nothing in the world had changed. I watched him smear mashed banana across the tray and felt my body finally catch up. That's the part people don't talk about. After something big happens, life doesn't pause to let you process it. You still have dishes. You still have laundry. You still have a child who needs you. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you realize you're still carrying the same question. Why did it take proof for someone to finally see you? I kept thinking about the people who would watch this and feel that familiar ache. The ones who are always told they're fine. The ones who learn to be low maintenance so they wouldn't be rejected. If you're one of those people, I need you to hear this clearly. Your ability to survive alone is not proof you don't need care. It's proof you've been practicing. And if you've ever been in a family where someone else tells your story for you, you know how quickly silence becomes a weapon, not a loud weapon, a quiet one, the kind that erases you without leaving fingerprints. Maybe you've asked yourself the same thing people asked me. Why didn't you just call? Why didn't you show up? Why didn't you say something sooner? Let me answer that, the way no one answered it for me, because reaching out isn't one action. It's a series of risks. It's risking being dismissed, risking being told you're overreacting, risking being seen as the problem. And after you've been minimized enough times, you stop volunteering for that pain. You tell yourself you're strong. You tell yourself you don't care. You tell yourself it's not worth the drama. But the cost of staying quiet is always higher than it looks at first. It starts small. Someone forgets to invite you. Someone speaks for you to help. Someone assumes you don't want to be involved. Then it becomes a pattern, and patterns become your reputation. Soon, people don't just forget you. They expect you to stay forgotten. If that's where you are right now, I'm not going to tell you to blow up your family. I'm not going to tell you to scream your truth in front of everyone. That's not real life for most people. But I am going to tell you something practical. Leave a trace, not to punish anyone, to protect yourself. A text message that's clear, an email that confirms what was said, a screenshot, a date written down in a notebook you don't lose. Because here's what I learned the hard way. When you rely on memories, the loudest person wins. When you have evidence, the story can't be rewritten as easily. This isn't about being petty. It's about not letting someone else decide what your life looked like. And I know that can sound cold, especially if you were raised to keep the peace. If you were taught that family problems should stay private, that you don't air things out, that you don't make people uncomfortable. But peace that requires you to disappear isn't peace. It's just quiet. If you're watching this and thinking, I don't even know where to start, start small. Pick one thing you need to say out loud, one sentence. Something simple like, I wasn't included, and I need to understand why. Or, please don't speak for me. If you have a question, ask me directly. Or even, I'm not okay with this. You don't need the perfect speech. You need the first honest line. And if you're afraid that speaking up will make you lose people, I won't lie to you. Sometimes it does. But what you're losing isn't love. It's access to the version of you that stays quiet so everyone else stays comfortable. And that version will cost you your voice over time. I know this because it almost cost me mine. I spent years thinking my silence made me mature. I thought it made me easier to love. It didn't. It made me easy to ignore. So if you're in that place right now, if you're the strong one, the independent one, the one who always handles it, ask yourself something. If you disappeared tomorrow, would anyone notice right away? And if the answer scares you, don't wait for a moment like mine to force the truth into the open. You don't need a public scene to reclaim your place. You need consistency. You need boundaries. You need a record. You need to stop letting your life be summarized by someone who benefits from you staying silent. Because the truth is, your story matters, even if you've been trained to believe it doesn't. And the earlier you claim it, the less you'll have to fight for it later. That's not bitterness. That's survival with dignity. A week later, I drove back out to the farm office for the first time since the festival. The road was the same. The vines were the same. But something in the air felt different, not peaceful, just honest. My father was already there when I arrived. He stood by the open door, holding a box of files like he'd been meaning to move them for years. He didn't hug me. He didn't try to make it a tender moment. He just said, "I've been going through everything." That was his way of saying he was finally looking. Inside, the office still smelled like dust and old paper. The framed photo on the wall was gone. In its place was an empty nail. I didn't ask where it went. Some questions don't need answers. They just need to be noticed. My father pulled a chair out for me. Then he sat across the desk, shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of his choices had finally found a place to rest. He slid a document toward me. It wasn't an apology letter. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a revised access agreement for the property and the farm operations clear. Written, dated. My name included. Milo's name included. Evidence. I stared at it longer than I expected to, because part of me still didn't trust good things when they arrived quietly. My father cleared his throat. "I can't undo what I didn't see," he said. "But I can stop pretending I didn't choose what was easier." He didn't blame Claire, not in that moment. He didn't turn this into a story where he was the victim of manipulation. He said the harder thing. He admitted he had participated, and that was the first real consequence. Claire wasn't in the office. I had wondered if she would be, if there would be another confrontation, another attempt to reclaim control. But what I learned after the festival was this. People like Claire don't collapse because someone humiliates them. They collapse when the system stops rewarding them. Claire had lost access, not just to the farm list or the festival committee. She lost access to authority. The phone calls stopped going through her first. The emails stopped being forwarded to her. The decisions stopped circling around her emotions. And without that, her story didn't have an audience. My father told me she was staying with a friend in town. He didn't say it with satisfaction. He said it like a fact you note in a report. Because the point wasn't to watch her suffer. The point was to stop letting her reshape reality. My father opened another folder and pushed it toward me. Inside were copies of emails, schedules, and the old land paperwork. He had printed them out himself. That's how I knew he understood what mattered now, not what we felt, what could be proven. He looked at Milo, who was sitting on the floor nearby, tapping a toy against the wood like it was a drum. My father's face softened, just for a second. Then he looked back at me. "I called you independent," he said, and I used that word like it meant I didn't have to show up. He paused. I was wrong. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't a movie line. It was plain. And because it was plain, it felt real. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel it, but because there are some tears you don't waste on late realizations. I just nodded once. There was a long silence after that. Not the kind of silence that erases you, the kind that gives you room to exist without performing. When I left the office that day, I didn't feel like everything was healed. It wasn't. Trust doesn't snap back into place because someone finally admits the truth. Trust is built, like evidence is built, slowly, repeatedly, with consistency. But I did feel something shift inside me. I stopped carrying the shame. For years, I had wondered if I was too quiet, too sensitive, too dramatic in my head. I had asked myself if maybe I had earned my invisibility by not demanding more. That day, sitting in the farm office, I realized something that changed how I saw everything. The truth didn't break my family. The truth revealed what was already broken. Claire didn't create the cracks alone. My father didn't create them alone either. The cracks were there in every moment someone chose comfort over clarity, in every time a question wasn't asked because it might cause conflict, in every time my silence was used as evidence that I didn't matter. Truth didn't destroy anything solid. It only removed the cover from what had been fragile the whole time. And if you're watching this thinking, that sounds familiar, you're not crazy. You're not too much for wanting to be acknowledged. You're not ungrateful for wanting basic respect. You're not wrong for wanting your place in your own story. Some people are raised in homes where love is loud. Others are raised in homes where love is assumed and assumptions get people erased. If you grew up being praised for handling things alone, I want you to remember this. Being quiet doesn't make you easy to love. It makes you easy to overlook. And you don't have to wait for a public moment to stop disappearing. You can start by claiming the truth in small, steady ways. You can leave a record. You can set a boundary. You can insist on being spoken to directly. Not to win, to exist. So I'm going to ask you something. If you've ever felt erased in your own family, what did it look like for you? Was it the invites you never got? The decisions made without you? The way someone else spoke for you? Like you weren't in the room? If you're comfortable, share your story in the comments, not to compete with mine, not to prove anything to strangers, but because being seen out loud is sometimes the first step to being seen at all. And if you've made it this far, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this, because no one should have to become evidence just to be acknowledged.